The funeral was over, and Emma Grace had never felt more alone standing in a room full of people who were supposed to be her family. Her husband, Thomas, lay cold in the ground, taken by fever just 3 weeks after their second anniversary, and his parents had wasted no time gathering around like vultures to pick apart what remained of his estate. Emma was 22 years old, a widow in 1878, Eureka Springs, Arkansas, with nothing but the worn calico dress on her back and a heart shattered into pieces she wasn't sure would ever fit back together. "The house belongs to us now," Thomas's mother, Constance, declared coldly as Emma stood trembling in the parlor of what had been her home. "Thomas inherited it from his grandfather, and now that he's gone, it returns to the family. You have no claim here, girl." Emma's throat tightened, tears burning behind her eyes. "But Thomas said this was our home. He promised me we'd grow old here together, raise our children in these rooms." "Promises from a dead man hold no weight," Thomas's father, Herbert, cut in sharply. "You have until tomorrow morning to gather your personal effects and leave. We'll be moving in by week's end." The lawyer standing beside them shuffled his papers uncomfortably, but said nothing. Emma realized with crushing certainty that there would be no help from that quarter. Thomas had been so young, so full of life and plans for their future, that neither of them had thought to make proper legal arrangements. She had signed nothing, owned nothing in her own name. In the eyes of the law and society, she was simply a woman who had briefly borrowed a dead man's life. "Where am I supposed to go?" Emma whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "That's hardly our concern," Constance sniffed. "Perhaps you should have considered that before you trapped our son into marriage. A shopkeeper's daughter with no prospects, no dowry. We knew you'd be the ruin of him." The accusation was so unfair, so cruel, that Emma felt something crack inside her chest. Thomas had pursued her with gentle determination, had courted her with wildflowers and poetry, had sworn before God and witnesses that she was the only woman he would ever love. And now his parents were rewriting history, painting her as some sort of scheming woman who had manipulated their precious son. Emma fled the house with whatever she could carry in a single carpetbag, her vision blurred with tears as she stumbled down the dusty main street of Eureka Springs. The town was nestled in the Ozark Mountains, known for its natural springs and the healing properties people claimed the waters possessed. But there was no spring that could heal the wound Emma carried now, no miracle water that could wash away the betrayal and loss that threatened to drag her under like a riptide. She had $17 to her name, money she'd earned taking in mending work. It wouldn't last long. Emma found herself at the modest boarding house run by Mrs. Sullivan, an Irish widow who had always treated her kindly. But when Emma explained her situation, the older woman's face creased with sympathy and regret. "Oh, darling girl, I wish I could help you," Mrs. Sullivan said, wringing her hands. "But I've only got one room available, and it's $6 a week. I've got my own bills to pay, and the bank doesn't care about sad stories." Emma did the arithmetic quickly in her head. Less than 3 weeks before her money ran out, and that was if she didn't eat. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. She had no family of her own anymore. Her father had died when she was 16, her mother 2 years after that. Thomas had been everything, her whole world, and now that world had collapsed like a house of cards. She took the room because she had no other choice, and spent that first night lying awake on the narrow bed, staring at water stains on the ceiling and trying to figure out how she was going to survive. By morning, she had formulated a plan. It wasn't much of one, but it was all she had. She would find work, any work, and she would prove to Thomas's family and to everyone else that she was stronger than they thought. The problem was that Eureka Springs in 1878 didn't offer many opportunities for a young widow with no connections. Emma spent 3 days walking from business to business, asking about positions. The general store didn't need help. The hotel had a full staff. The restaurant owner took one look at her and suggested she might try her luck at the saloon, with an implication that made Emma's cheeks burn with shame and anger. By the 4th day, Emma was down to $12 and growing desperate. She was sitting on a bench outside the general store, trying to hold back tears of frustration, when she heard a commotion down the street. A horse had spooked, rearing and kicking, and its rider was struggling to bring it under control. Emma watched as a tall man in dusty trail clothes stepped forward calmly, catching the horse's bridle and speaking in low, soothing tones that she couldn't quite make out. Within moments, the animal had settled, blowing softly through its nostrils as the man stroked its neck. The grateful rider tipped his hat and rode off, but the man who had helped remained in the street, adjusting his hat against the late September sun. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and the lean, rangy build of someone who spent his life outdoors. When he turned, Emma caught a glimpse of startlingly blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat, and something in her chest gave an unexpected flutter before she firmly pushed the feeling away. She was in mourning, desperately poor and alone. Romance was the furthest thing from what she needed. But the man had noticed her staring. He walked over with an easy, confident stride, though his expression was kind rather than forward. "Pardon me, madam, but you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders. I don't mean to intrude, but is there something I might help with?" Emma was so surprised by the direct question that she almost laughed. "Unless you're hiring, I don't think there's much anyone can do." The man tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Any kind," Emma admitted, too tired and worried to maintain her pride. "I can cook, clean, mend, keep accounts. I'm a hard worker and I'm honest, but nobody in this town seems to need those qualities." "Fletcher Pritchard," the man said, extending his hand. "Most folks call me Fletcher. I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, runs cattle and horses. Been looking for someone to help with the household side of things since my housekeeper retired and moved to live with her daughter in Little Rock. Can't say I'm much good at keeping a place livable when I'm out working the land from dawn to dusk." Emma shook his hand automatically, her mind racing. "You're offering me work, just like that. You don't even know me." Fletcher's mouth quirked in a slight smile. "I know you've got honest eyes and you're clearly down on your luck. I know you're not afraid to ask for help when you need it, which takes courage. And I'm a pretty good judge of character. Been dealing with horses and cattle long enough to read people pretty well, too. Now, I'm not saying it's an easy job. The ranch house is big and it needs proper tending. But it comes with room and board plus $20 a month. If you're willing to work hard, I'm willing to take a chance. $20 a month plus a place to live and food to eat." It was more than Emma had dared hope for. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. A young widow, moving out to a ranch alone with an unmarried man. The scandal would be immediate and vicious. She would be ruined in the eyes of polite society. Then again, polite society had already turned its back on her. Thomas's parents had made sure of that with their cold dismissal and barely veiled accusations. Emma had nothing left to lose except her life itself, and that wouldn't last long if she starved to death trying to protect a reputation that was already in tatters. "I'll take it," she said, meeting Fletcher's eyes squarely. "When do I start? How about today?" I've got my wagon around back, was just picking up supplies. We can head out whenever you're ready." Emma thought of her meager possessions at the boarding house, of Mrs. Sullivan, who would be relieved to rent the room to someone who could actually pay. "Give me an hour to settle my affairs." Fletcher nodded. "I'll meet you right here. And madam, I think you just made both our lives a little easier." As Emma hurried back to the boarding house, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. Small and fragile as a bird's egg, but there nonetheless. Maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this after all. The ride out to Fletcher's ranch gave Emma her first real chance to take stock of the man who had just offered her salvation. He drove the wagon with casual competence, his hands steady on the reins as they followed a winding trail through the Arkansas hills. The September afternoon was warm but not oppressive, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and dry grass. "Been ranching out here about 4 years now," Fletcher said, his voice easy and conversational. "Came west from Missouri after the war ended. Spent some time working other people's land, saved up enough to buy my own place. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine, and I'm building it into something good." Emma appreciated that he was giving her information without prying into her own story. "You run it alone. Got 2 hands who help with the cattle and horses. Good men, brothers actually. Jake and Samuel. They've got a cabin on the far side of the property. You won't see much of them unless you want to. They generally fend for themselves for meals and such." The ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, and Emma felt her breath catch. It was a solid structure of timber and stone, larger than she'd expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Mountains rose in the distance, painted purple and blue in the afternoon light. There was a barn, a stable, and several other outbuildings, all well maintained. Whatever else Fletcher Pritchard might be, he clearly took pride in his property. "It's beautiful," Emma said softly. Fletcher pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "It suits me. Now let me give you the tour and show you what you're getting into." The interior of the house was spacious, but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was sturdy and functional, but dust coated every surface. Dishes were stacked in the kitchen basin, and Emma could see where Fletcher had been making half-hearted attempts to keep things clean without much success. But the bones of the place were good, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a stone fireplace that would keep things warm when winter came. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Fletcher said, hefting her carpetbag easily. "It's got a good bed and a decent view. Washroom is at the end of the hall. I'm at the far end, so you'll have your privacy." The room he showed her was simple but comfortable, easily twice the size of what she'd had at the boarding house. The bed had a sturdy frame and a thick mattress, and there was a wardrobe for her few clothes. The window overlooked the front of the property, with those distant mountains painting the horizon. "It's more than adequate," Emma said, setting her bag down carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Pritchard." "Fletcher," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be living under the same roof, we might as well be on first-name terms. What should I call you?" "Emma." "Emma Grace." Something flickered across Fletcher's face, recognition perhaps, but he didn't comment. Emma wondered if he'd heard about her situation, about Thomas's death and his family's cruel treatment. In a town the size of Eureka Springs, gossip traveled fast. But if he knew, he had the decency not to mention it. "Well then, Emma, why don't you get settled in, and we can talk about the specifics of the work over supper? I'll admit my cooking skills are limited to things that can be fried in a pan or boiled in a pot, so anything you can manage will be an improvement." After Fletcher left her alone, Emma sank down onto the bed and let herself take a full breath for the first time in days. She was safe. She had a roof over her head and the promise of steady work. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she married Thomas, full of love and laughter and the children they'd planned to have. But it was a life, and right now, that was enough. She unpacked her few belongings quickly, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the wardrobe and placing her hairbrush and the small daguerreotype of her parents on the dresser. The photograph of Thomas she kept wrapped in a handkerchief at the bottom of her bag. Looking at his face hurt too much still, the wound too fresh and raw. Downstairs, Emma found Fletcher in the kitchen, examining the contents of the pantry with a slightly helpless expression. She couldn't help but smile a little at the sight. "Why don't you show me what supplies you picked up in town, and I'll see what I can put together," she offered. Relief washed over Fletcher's face. "You're already earning your keep. I bought flour, salt pork, beans, some canned goods. There's a vegetable garden out back that's half gone to seed, but there might be some things still worth harvesting. Chickens in the coop for eggs." Emma rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Within an hour, she had a simple but hearty meal prepared. Salt pork fried with potatoes she'd found in the root cellar, beans cooked with a bit of molasses, and biscuits that came out of the oven golden and flaky. She even managed to find some wild blackberry preserves in the pantry, likely made by the previous housekeeper. Fletcher's eyes widened when she set the food on the table. "I take back what I said earlier. You're not earning your keep, you're exceeding it by a considerable margin." They ate together as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The silence was comfortable rather than awkward, and Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since Thomas fell ill. There was something steady about Fletcher, something solid and reassuring. He didn't pry or push, didn't expect her to fill every moment with conversation. He simply existed alongside her, and that was a gift she hadn't known she needed. "I heard about your husband," Fletcher said quietly as they finished the meal. "Thomas Grace, I'm sorry for your loss." Emma's hand stilled on her fork. She'd been expecting this conversation, but that didn't make it easier. "Thank you. And I heard about what his family did to you after. That wasn't right, Emma. You deserved better than that." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, unexpected and hot. "People don't always get what they deserve." "No, they don't," Fletcher agreed. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying to do right by each other. You've had a rough time of it, and I want you to know that here on this ranch you're safe. You've got a place for as long as you need it. No strings attached, no expectations beyond the work we agreed on. You've got my word on that." The sincerity in his voice broke something loose in Emma's chest, and before she could stop herself, tears were streaming down her face. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back the sobs, but they came anyway, great shuddering gasps of grief and relief and exhaustion that she'd been holding back for weeks. Fletcher moved around the table and crouched beside her chair, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. "It's all right," he said softly. "Let it out. You're allowed to break down, Emma. God knows you've earned it." So she did. She cried for Thomas, and the future they'd never have, for the cruelty of his parents and her own helplessness, for the fear and uncertainty that had consumed her. And Fletcher stayed right there beside her, patient and steady, until the storm passed and she was left feeling hollow but somehow lighter. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, wiping at her face with her napkin. "I didn't mean to fall apart on you like that." "Don't apologize," Fletcher said firmly. "Grief has its own timeline, and healing isn't a straight path. You cry when you need to, rage when you need to, and know that you're not alone in this." "All right," Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But something had shifted in that moment, some small seed of trust planted between them. Fletcher Pritchard was a good man, she realized. The kind of man who helped skittish horses and desperate widows without asking for anything in return. The kind of man Thomas had been trying to become before illness stole him away. The thought should have made her sad, but instead, it brought a strange sort of comfort. Maybe Thomas would have approved of this arrangement, would have been glad that Emma had found someone decent to help her through the worst of her grief. She liked to think so, anyway. The days settled into a rhythm after that. Emma rose with the sun and threw herself into the work of running the household. She cleaned the ranch house from top to bottom, beating dust from curtains and scrubbing floors until they shone. She tended the vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the summer squash and tomatoes before the first frost could claim them. She cooked 3 meals a day, proper meals that brought color back to Fletcher's sun-weathered face and earned his genuine praise. In return, Fletcher was unfailingly respectful and kind. He never pushed into her space, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. He worked from dawn until well past dusk, riding out to check on his cattle, mending fences, working with the horses he was training to sell. Emma would watch him sometimes from the kitchen window as he moved through the corral, his movements patient and sure as he taught a young horse to accept a saddle and bridle. Jake and Samuel, the ranch hands, were equally courteous. They tipped their hats when they saw her, and thanked her sincerely the few times she made extra food and brought it out to their cabin. They were younger than Fletcher, maybe 23 and 25 respectively, with the same dark hair and quick smiles. Emma appreciated that they treated her with respect rather than speculation. 3 weeks passed, and Emma felt herself slowly coming back to life. The sharp edges of her grief began to dull into something more manageable, a constant ache rather than a stabbing pain. She found herself humming while she worked, enjoying the satisfaction of a well-kept home and a full pantry. She even started to smile again, small tentative expressions that felt rusty but real. Fletcher noticed, of course. He was observant in a quiet way that Emma was beginning to appreciate. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "You seem lighter somehow, like maybe the weight is getting a little easier to carry." Emma considered the observation carefully. "I think maybe it is. I'll always miss Thomas. He was a good man, and we should have had a lifetime together, but I'm starting to understand that I can honor his memory while still living my own life." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Fletcher said. "The dead don't want us to stop living. They want us to remember them while we keep moving forward." "Did you lose someone?" Emma asked, emboldened by the growing ease between them. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "My parents during the war. Raiders came through while I was off fighting, burned the farm, killed everyone they found. Came home to ashes and graves. For a long time I thought I'd died along with them, that I was just a ghost going through the motions. But eventually, I realized that surviving meant something. Meant I had a responsibility to build something good, something that would have made them proud." Emma reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "I think you've done that. This ranch, the life you've built, it's good and honest and true. They would be proud." Fletcher turned his hand over, his calloused fingers curling gently around hers. The touch sent warmth spreading through Emma's chest, different from anything she'd felt with Thomas. Not better or worse, just different, new, and terrifying in its implications. She pulled her hand back, suddenly flustered. "I should check on the bread dough. It'll need punching down." Fletcher let her go without comment, but Emma felt his gaze following her as she fled into the house. Her heart was pounding, and she pressed her hands against her flushed cheeks. What was she doing? Thomas had been dead less than 2 months. She had no business feeling anything for another man, especially not Fletcher, who had been nothing but kind and generous to her. But the heart, Emma was discovering, didn't follow logical rules or proper timelines. It felt what it felt. Consequences be damned. Winter arrived early that year, bringing cold rains that turned the roads to mud and made outdoor work miserable. Fletcher came in one evening in mid-November soaked to the skin, shivering despite his heavy coat. Emma took one look at him and went into action, heating water for a bath and making hot coffee laced with a bit of whiskey she'd found in the pantry. "You'll catch your death," she scolded, pushing the coffee into his hands. "Go get out of those wet clothes and warm up properly." Fletcher obeyed, and when he came back downstairs in dry clothes with his hair still damp, Emma had stew waiting and the fire built up high. They ate in companionable silence, but Emma couldn't help noticing the way Fletcher kept glancing at her, something uncertain in his expression. "What is it?" she finally asked. Fletcher set down his spoon carefully. "I've been thinking. Winter's going to be hard this year, I can feel it, and I've been worried about you, about what people in town might be saying. A young widow living alone with an unmarried man, even with propriety and separate rooms, the gossip could be damaging to your reputation." Emma felt her stomach drop. Was he going to send her away, ask her to leave? She couldn't go back to Eureka Springs, couldn't face the pitying looks and whispered judgments. "What are you saying, Fletcher?" He met her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable there, something that made her breath catch. "I'm saying that we could solve the problem if we got married. Not a real marriage, not at first, just a practical arrangement. You'd have the protection of my name and I'd have the help I need running this place. We could keep things just as they are now, separate rooms, no expectations. Just two people helping each other survive." Emma's mind reeled. Marriage to Fletcher. The idea should have been absurd, should have felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but instead she found herself actually considering it. "And if I said no?" she asked quietly. "Then nothing changes," Fletcher said immediately. "You still have a place here for as long as you want it. I won't force anything on you, Emma. This is just an offer, a practical solution to a practical problem." But it wasn't just practical, Emma realized as she studied his face. There was something more in his eyes, something that spoke of genuine care and perhaps the beginnings of something deeper. And if she was honest with herself, she felt it too. That pull, that growing attachment that had been developing slowly over the past weeks. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take all the time you need," Fletcher said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. She thought about Thomas, about the love they'd shared and the dreams they'd built together. She thought about his parents and their cruelty, about the way society discarded women who didn't fit into neat little boxes. And she thought about Fletcher, about his steadiness and kindness, about the way he made her feel safe and valued. On the 4th day she found Fletcher in the barn working on repairing a saddle. "I'll marry you," she said without preamble, "but I have conditions." Fletcher set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "Name them." "I need time. Time to finish grieving Thomas properly. Time to figure out who I am now that my whole life has changed. I need you to promise that you won't expect anything from me that I'm not ready to give." "Done," Fletcher said without hesitation. "Anything else?" "If this is going to work, we have to be honest with each other. No secrets, no games, just truth, even when it's hard." "I can do that," Fletcher said. He stepped closer, and Emma could smell leather and hay and the particular scent that was uniquely him. "Emma, I want you to know something." This started as a practical idea, but somewhere along the way it became more than that. "I care about you, not just as my housekeeper or even as a friend. I care about you in a way that scares me a little if I'm being honest. But I meant what I said. I'll wait as long as you need. No pressure, no expectations. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears this time. You're a good man, Fletcher Pritchard, better than I probably deserve. You deserve everything good in this world, Fletcher said fiercely, and I plan to spend a long time proving that to you. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Eureka Springs. The pastor was understanding, and the few witnesses they gathered were people who had shown Emma kindness over the years. Thomas's parents were notably absent, and Emma found she didn't care. This was her life now, her future, and she was choosing it with open eyes and a heart that was slowly learning to hope again. The winter that followed was harsh, with storms that buried the ranch under feet of snow and temperatures that made going outside a misery. But inside the ranch house, Emma found an unexpected warmth. She and Fletcher developed their own routines and rhythms, learning the small details of each other's lives. She discovered that he liked his coffee strong and black, that he read books about animal husbandry and history, that he had a quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Fletcher learned that Emma sang while she cooked, old songs her mother had taught her, that she was fiercely intelligent and had opinions on everything from politics to philosophy, that she had a tender heart beneath her practical exterior, feeding scraps to the barn cats and worrying over the horses when the weather turned bad. They still slept in separate rooms, honoring the boundaries Emma had set. But slowly, gradually, those boundaries began to shift. A touch that lingered a moment longer than necessary, glances that held heat and promise. Conversations that stretched late into the night, sitting by the fire while the wind howled outside. One evening in February, Emma found herself studying Fletcher as he read beside the fireplace. The light played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the gentle curve of his mouth. He glanced up and caught her staring, a question in his eyes. "I was just thinking," Emma said softly, "about how lucky I am. I could have ended up anywhere after Thomas died with anyone, but somehow I ended up here with you." Fletcher set down his book and turned to face her fully. "Emma, there's something I need to say. I've been holding it back because I didn't want to rush you, but I can't keep it in anymore. I love you, not as a friend or a housekeeper or even just as a wife in name. I love you with everything I am, and I think I have since the day I saw you sitting outside that general store looking like your world had ended. I wanted to be the one to help you build a new world, and somewhere in the process, you became my whole world." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She'd known this was coming, felt it building between them like gathering storm clouds. But hearing the words out loud still hit her with the force of thunder. "Fletcher, you don't have to say anything back," Fletcher interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. All of me, for all of you, for as long as you'll have me." Emma stood and crossed to where he sat, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She took his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palms, and looked into those blue eyes that had become as familiar as breathing. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I love Thomas, and I'll always carry that with me, but I love you too, Fletcher. Differently, but just as real, just as true. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You made me remember that I'm more than just someone's widow, more than a woman society decided wasn't worth protecting. You made me feel whole again." The kiss they shared was soft and sweet, full of promise and possibility. It tasted like new beginnings and second chances, like everything Emma had thought she'd lost forever. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Emma felt lighter than she had in months. "Does this mean I can finally court my own wife properly?" Fletcher asked with a grin. Emma laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "I suppose it does. Though I have to warn you, I'm a tough critic. You'll have to work hard to impress me." "Challenge accepted," Fletcher said, pulling her back into his arms. "I've got the rest of our lives to get it right." That night, Emma moved her few belongings from her room into Fletcher's, and they began their marriage in truth. It was different from what she'd had with Thomas, but no less meaningful. Where Thomas had been gentle and poetic, Fletcher was passionate and direct. Where Thomas had made her feel protected, Fletcher made her feel powerful. Together, they created something entirely their own, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new life. Emma discovered she was pregnant in late April, and the joy on Fletcher's face when she told him made her heart sing. They spent the summer preparing, converting one of the spare rooms into a nursery and making plans for their growing family. Their son was born in December of 1879, a healthy baby boy with Fletcher's blue eyes and Emma's dark hair. They named him Thomas Fletcher Pritchard, honoring the past while celebrating the future. Fletcher cried when Emma told him the name she'd chosen, understanding the gift she was giving him, the trust she was placing in their new life together. The years that followed were full and rich. Emma and Fletcher built their ranch into a prosperous operation, known throughout Arkansas for quality horses and honest dealing. They had 3 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1881, twin boys named Henry and William in 1883. The house that had once been dusty and neglected rang with laughter and life. Emma never saw Thomas's parents again after that terrible day. They'd evicted her. She heard through town gossip that they'd lost the house to debts Thomas had apparently accumulated that they couldn't pay. Part of her felt a bitter satisfaction at the news, but mostly she just felt sad for them. They'd let their pride and cruelty cost them not only their son's widow, but any chance of knowing their grandchildren. Fletcher proved every day that he'd meant his promises. He was a devoted husband and father, working hard to provide for his family while never neglecting to show them how much he loved them. He taught young Thomas to ride and rope, showed Sarah how to gentle a skittish colt, and carried the twins on his shoulders until they were almost too big for it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher and Emma sat on that same porch where they'd shared so many important conversations, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Emma leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and marveled at how much her life had changed. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "About that day outside the general store," Emma said softly. "About how desperate and scared I was, how certain I was that my life was over, and about how you proved me wrong in the most beautiful way possible." Fletcher took her hand, threading their fingers together. "You gave me just as much as I gave you, Emma, more even. You took a lonely ranch and turned it into a home. You took a man who thought he'd spend his life alone and gave him a family. You're the bravest person I know." Emma turned to look at him, seeing the gray that was just starting to thread through his hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years of laughter and hard work. He was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen, but more than that, he was her partner, her love, her everything. "We did it," she said. "We took all the broken pieces and built something whole and good." "We did," Fletcher agreed, "and we're going to keep doing it every day for the rest of our lives." Their son Thomas came running up to the porch then, breathless and excited, talking about a bird's nest he'd found. Sarah followed, her dress muddy from playing by the creek, demanding that Emma come see a family of frogs she'd discovered. The twins toddled after their siblings, getting into everything with the determined chaos that only 2-year-olds could manage. Emma rose to attend to her children, but not before Fletcher caught her hand one more time. "I love you," he said simply. "Always have, always will." "I love you too," Emma replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you for seeing me that day. Thank you for giving me everything I needed." "You already had everything you needed inside you," Fletcher said. "I just gave you a safe place to remember that." As Emma followed her children into the house, calling out that supper would be ready soon, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of grief and despair to a life overflowing with love and purpose. From a widow with nothing to her name to a woman who had built an empire of family and home, alongside a man who valued her for exactly who she was. The road had been hard, marked by loss and pain that had changed her forever. But it had also been marked by incredible kindness, by a cowboy who had stopped to help a stranger and ended up giving her the world. Emma had learned that life rarely went according to plan, that sometimes the worst moments could lead to the most unexpected blessings. She had learned that love came in different forms, and that opening your heart again after loss wasn't a betrayal but an act of courage. She had learned that family wasn't always the people you were born to, but sometimes the people you chose and who chose you back. And she had learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, capable of surviving storms that would have broken a lesser woman. As the years continued to pass, Emma and Fletcher grew old together on their ranch in the Arkansas hills. They saw their children grow up and start families of their own, welcomed grandchildren who played in the same rooms where their parents had played. The ranch prospered and grew, becoming a landmark in the area, known for the love and integrity of the family who ran it. Emma never forgot Thomas or the love they'd shared in their brief time together, but she no longer lived in the shadow of that loss. Instead, she carried it as part of her story, one chapter in a much longer book filled with joy and triumph, and the daily victories of a life well lived. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the house was peaceful, Emma would sometimes find Fletcher's hand and remember that day outside the general store. Remember the desperation and fear, and the tall cowboy who had seen past her present circumstances to the strong woman beneath, who had offered her not charity but opportunity, not pity but partnership. Thomas's parents had left her with nothing, had tried to break her spirit and steal her future. But Fletcher Pritchard had made sure she had everything she needed, not through money or possessions but through respect, love, and the space to heal and grow. He had given her back herself, and together they had built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. Their love story became the stuff of local legend, told and retold by neighbors and friends. The widow who lost everything and the cowboy who gave her the world. It was a story about second chances and the power of human kindness, about how sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the greatest blessings if you had the courage to keep moving forward. When Emma was an old woman, sitting in her rocking chair on that familiar porch with Fletcher beside her, she would look out at the land they'd built together and feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the hard times that had taught her strength, for the loss that had taught her resilience, and most of all, for the man who had seen her worth when the world had tried to tell her she had none. Fletcher would catch her looking and smile, that same gentle smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago. And without words, they would understand each other perfectly, the way only two people who had built a life together could. They had taken tragedy and transformed it into triumph, had taken endings and turned them into beginnings. As the sun set over the mountains one final time, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Emma reached for Fletcher's hand. Their fingers intertwined with the ease of decades of practice, and she felt the steady beat of his pulse against her palm. Here, in this moment, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd created together, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The Wild West had been hard on those who were weak or unlucky, had claimed countless lives and broken countless spirits. But it had also offered opportunities for those brave enough to seize them, for people willing to take chances on strangers and themselves. Emma and Fletcher had seized their opportunity and held on tight, riding out the storms together and emerging stronger on the other side. Their story didn't end with a grand gesture or dramatic moment. Instead, it continued quietly, day after day, in the small kindnesses and steady love that sustained them both. In morning coffee shared over the kitchen table and evening walks through the property they'd built together. In children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, teaching new generations about the power of compassion and perseverance. When people asked Emma about her life, about how she'd survived losing everything and built it all back again, she would smile and give a simple answer. I met a cowboy who saw me when I needed to be seen, who helped me when I needed help most. And I was smart enough to recognize a good man when one offered me his hand. Everything else just followed from that one moment of grace. And Fletcher, overhearing, would add with a grin, "Best decision I ever made was offering that fierce, heartbroken woman a job. Second best was convincing her to marry me. Everything good in my life came from those two choices." They would laugh together then, the sound warm and familiar, and their children would roll their eyes affectionately at their parents' well-worn love story. But secretly, every one of those children hoped to find something even half as strong and true as what Emma and Fletcher had built together. In the end, Emma Grace Pritchard's story was one of transformation and redemption, of finding light in the darkest moments and love in the most unexpected places. She had started as a desperate widow with nothing to her name and became a matriarch of a thriving family, a cornerstone of her community, and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And through it all, Fletcher stood beside her, the cowboy who had seen her worth when no one else would, who had given her not just material security but something far more precious, the chance to discover her own strength and write her own future. Together, they proved that sometimes the greatest love stories come from the ashes of tragedy, and that second chances, when embraced with an open heart, can lead to happiness beyond anything previously imagined. Their legacy lived on long after they were gone, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the descendants who inherited their values of hard work and compassion, and in the story that continued to inspire those who heard it. Emma and Fletcher had taken the hand they were dealt and played it with courage, grace, and an unwavering commitment to each other and the life they were building. That, in the end, was what mattered most. Not the money or the property or the prestige, but the love they'd shared and the family they'd created, the way they'd proven that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, kindness and compassion could triumph over cruelty and greed. Emma had lost everything once, but with Fletcher's help and her own indomitable spirit, she'd gained everything that truly mattered and then some.